I'm sure you're going to enjoy today's edition of Prophecy in the News. We have J.R. Church with us. He's going to be discussing or continuing the discussion of his brand new book. And J.R., welcome back.
Thanks, Gary. By the way, it's good to be back.
I'm sure.
It's good to be back on the set. I think back over the years of all of the programs that we have done. And I'm praying that we're not coming to the close of those programs until we hear the shout and the trumpet sound.
Amen. All right.
Let's talk about Daniel. Daniel reveals the bloodline of the Antichrist, and he does. He spends some time dealing with the little horn. And by the way, he's the only Old Testament prophet who deals with the Antichrist. And so when John writes about the Antichrist, in the book of Revelation, for example, he uses a lot of the euphemisms and the metaphors that Daniel used. He quotes from Daniel quite a bit in the book of Revelation.
As a matter of fact, Jesus himself quoted from Daniel, which I find amazing. And today, we are going to get to the heart of Daniel's prophecy. In fact, the 4 verses that we're going to start with, Daniel 9:24 through 27, I think, J.R., may be one of the most important sections in the entire Bible.
Yes. And if you'll notice, he starts out with Gabriel telling him that there will be 7 weeks and then 62 weeks.
Shall I read it?
He makes a separation there. Yes, please.
Okay. We have here in Daniel 9:24, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to bring reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and the prophecy and to anoint the most holy. That's an inclusive statement.
Yes.
Verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And J.R., that's where we start off.
He's making a separation. There are 7 weeks, and then there are 62 weeks. And Gary, between those two, there's a period of time. Now, there are a lot of theologians who have tried to figure this out, and they miss the idea that there are 7 weeks and 62 weeks. They just say there are 69 weeks. And Sir Robert Anderson, for example, he tried to put it all together and reduce the 365 and the 4th day year down to 360-day year by multiplying and subtracting and making them into days, and then from there making them into years. Well, you can't do that. In other words, he did not know that there would be a gap between the 7th week. There would first be 49 years, and then there would be 434 years.
And so you're talking about ordinary years as observed by Israel and without a lot of mathematical hocus pocus.
Yes.
When you get right down to it.
Yes, absolutely. And these years had to follow the weeks. The weeks were Shavuos. They were sabbatical years. So it didn't begin in 538 when Cyrus made the decree that you can go back home. It had to wait until 536, the first year of the next 7-year cycle, before the 7 weeks could begin. And it had to conclude with the ministry of Jesus. So it was very easy, by the way, once we had this chart of the 6,000 years of human history with all of the sabbatical years and the Jubilees, it was easy to figure it out.
Well, just to make it much clearer now, and we may be talking to people who have never looked at this prophecy closely before, this time period says that from the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince. Now there's the commandment is one bracket. The other bracket would be the emergence of Jesus, I suppose, for his public ministry, right?
Yes, that's right.
So you've got a time bracket here.
Mm-hmm.
And Daniel goes on to say, it'll be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, that's 62 weeks. The street shall be built again and the wall, even in troublous times. What is this street and the wall there?
After the 49 years, when Ahasuerus died and Esther was no longer queen, then set in a period of time called the troublous times.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Ezra and Nehemiah came, and they rebuilt the walls. All of that was in the interregnum period, the gap between the 7th and the 8th week.
Aha.
And when we come down to AD 27 to conclude the 69th week,
Mm-hmm.
then we have to wait for a long period of time before we get to the 70th week, because the 70th week is the tribulation period.
Ah, yes. Okay. And, of course, it's commonly referred to as Daniel's 70th week. And this brings us then to the next verse, verse 26, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. Clearly, that's the crucifixion of Christ, right?
Yes, that's right.
And the number here is 62. 62 weeks.
62 weeks or 434 years.
434 years. But not for himself. Of course, he gave his life for the world. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. So let's go into that a little bit.
Well, that's the future 70th week, called the tribulation period.
Mm-hmm.
And the prince there is the one that was discussed in the previous verses, when it says, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city of Jerusalem and the sanctuary,
Mm-hmm.
Herod's temple. Well, they were the Romans. So this prince that's coming one of these days will be a Roman prince. That is, he will be of the lineage of the Roman royalty.
Okay, let's talk about that again. And on our last broadcast discussing J.R.'s book, we went into this a little bit. Let's go into it a little bit more, because the people who came and destroyed the temple were Vespasian of the Flavian household, his son Titus, also of the Flavian household.
Yes.
They were clearly Romans, and they came and destroyed the city and the sanctuary. And so a lot of people will say, wait a minute, Romans. The Antichrist has to be of Roman descent, and that means, he is a European Roman, and he can't be anything else. And all this business that when people talk about the tribe of Dan giving birth to the Antichrist just can't be true, and so forth and so on. Well, that's really the heart of your book, isn't it?
Yes. And in the book that I wrote called Guardians of the Grail, it depicts the royalty of Europe as descending out of the Roman Empire, and all of the thrones of Europe are kin.
Mm-hmm.
They're kinfolks.
Yes.
They're the same lineage, same family tree. They never married common people. They always married royalty. And the future Antichrist will be related to all of the thrones of Europe. And if you'll look at, for example, the United States presidents, practically all of them were related to European royalty, including our current president, Mr. Obama.
I suppose on his mother's side.
Yes, on his mother's side. He's kin to George Bush. He's a cousin of George Bush. Through the Hinckleys, and on the mother's side. And he is therefore kin to all the thrones of Europe.
And yet, that being the case, and it certainly is, we still have to make room for Bible prophecy, which clearly says, in many other ways, that the Danite tribe, which left its home country early on, migrated up into Greece, plays a major part in the prophecies of the latter days. How do you
Yes.
bring those two ideas together?
Roman royalty goes right back to the Danite tribe. They were Spartans.
They were the Spartans.
Yes. They were Trojans who were cousins to the Spartans. By cousins, I mean in the family tree.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have the Danite connection. Now, when we get to this 9th chapter of Daniel, and by the way, this is a commentary on all 12 chapters, and we see the Antichrist moving from the 9th chapter through the 10th, and then through the dynasties of the Seleucids, until we get down to Antiochus Epiphanes, and he commits the abomination of desolation. And it flips right there, right at that very spot where Antiochus Epiphanes makes his showing, flips right to the Antichrist for the 3.5-year tribulation period.
Without pausing, really.
That's right. And therefore, Daniel didn't say, hey, there's going to be a gap here. He didn't tell us that the Antichrist wasn't going to show up for a few thousand years, but he seems to conclude it with Antiochus for Epiphanes, and then what he writes about the Antichrist just blends right in with that.
Wow.
Now, Jesus came along and talked about Antiochus Epiphanes, putting up this statue of the god Zeus on the Temple Mount, sacrificing a pig on the altar. And Jesus then went right into the future, to the future Antichrist. So Jesus, in Matthew 24, helps us to understand that Antiochus for Epiphanes was not the final antitype. He certainly was a type, a prototype, an antitype, whatever you want to call it, but he was not the final Antichrist.
Now let's read Daniel 9:27. We've gone through 24, 25, 26. And he is the way it begins. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. That would be a Shavuah,
Yes.
7 years. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. This is an important prophecy. It was quoted by Jesus in the Olivet Discourse.
Yes. And this is the Antichrist who commits the abomination of desolation in the middle of the tribulation period. I really hope you'll get this book. It's very, very important for God's children, for anyone who studies the Bible to understand. You know, Gary, God told Daniel to shut up the book and seal the words until the time of the end.
Yeah.
Then knowledge would be increased. Well, no commentaries were written on Daniel until about 100 or so years ago. And there has been, shall we say, this progression of gaining knowledge, more and more knowledge. But my thinking is we have revealed things about Daniel in this book that are not in anybody else's commentary.
Absolutely.
Now, Gary, in the back of the book, we have several pages that are devoted to a timeline. This timeline covers 6,000 years of human history. And we have everything in it that is of major importance. All the major historical events are listed along with these. And it has, for example, to begin with, we went back to the new moon of September in the year 4004 BC, because that's when everybody says creation took place.
And by the way, you may think you've seen timelines in the past, but not until you've seen this one.
Yeah.
J.R. put in so much time. In fact, this has been in the making for how many years now?
Oh, several years. And, of course, we've not published a book in several years. So this one, is really the premier work of my life.
Indeed.
So,
we're down to about 7 minutes, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about the next couple of chapters. We've looked at Daniel chapter 9, and let's get to chapters 10 and 11. Chapter 10, the vision of the heavenly messenger. And this is interesting.
Yes, the Lord actually comes to Daniel and gives him the prophecy of the future Antichrist and how there are going to be battles between the Ptolemies of Egypt and the Seleucids of Syria, and how it will all boil down in the form of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and then flips right over to the Antichrist, who goes through chapters 11 and 12 and shows the last half of the tribulation period.
Now, for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, this is plainly written, Daniel 11, chapter 3, and a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven. That actually happened, and we know very well who that mighty king is.
Yes, that was Alexander the Great, and he died in Babylon, and then his kingdom was split into at least four. There were more than four who contended, but they all finally fell into the purview of four of his generals.
Now, here's a riddle, and maybe you haven't thought of this before. Think about this. Alexander was a Greek, and yet the Bible prophesies that the Antichrist will come out of a Roman genealogy back in Daniel 9:24 through 27. How do you fit that together? The fact that Alexander the Great was a Greek, and yet he has shown his progeny come right down to Antiochus IV Epiphanes, type of the Antichrist.
And the Antiochus IV Epiphanes had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who merged into the royalty of Rome. And so coming out of that household is going to be this future world leader, the Antichrist.
We have here Antiochus IV Epiphanes. We read about the battles between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, two factions in the ruling dynasties of the Greeks, in chapter 11. And we read about Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and J.R., we come down to verse 35, which says, and some of them of understanding shall fall and try them and purge and to make them white even to the time of the end, because yet for a time appointed. And then, boom, you sort of change gears, and the king shall do according to his own will. We've been talking about this long genealogy that leads down to Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and suddenly between verses 35 and 36 of Daniel 11, we shift into the future without taking a breath.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
That's right, and he plants his tabernacle in the holy mountain, and he takes over the riches of Egypt, but tidings out of the north and out of the east are unsettling to him, and so he has to face this great, what I consider to be Islamic horde that comes in the Battle of Armageddon to destroy the Jewish people. They may be just simply coming on foot. They may just overwhelm Israel's borders and hand-to-hand fighting in the streets of Israel for this Battle of Armageddon. I think the Antichrist will probably be the enemy against the ones who come to destroy him and destroy the Jewish people. And that's when Jesus shows up, puts a stop to everything, and sets up his kingdom.
In other words, it's not all smooth sailing for the Antichrist once he comes to power. He has to fight many battles.
Yeah,
and
because something's going to trouble him, you know.
Indeed. And that brings us to the end of Daniel chapter 12, and everybody knows Daniel 12:4. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. That's a big prophecy. It's commonly referred to. We think we're living there right now.
Yep, we sure are.
And that book has been unsealed. And I think J.R. Church has gone a long way toward even unsealing it a little more.
And not only have we written about Daniel, all 12 chapters, but we have a chapter on the 243 missing years in the Jewish calendar.
Yes.
And we have a chapter on the saga of Jupiter and Saturn. So you really want to get this book. And all of these things are listed in the charts.
We're down to about the last 20 seconds or so. I think it's a wonderful thing that you could be back with us today on Prophecy.
Good to be back. It really is. If you don't know Christ as your Savior, you need to trust Him today. This is J.R. Church with Gary Stearman. Remember, He's coming soon, so keep looking up.